Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're tuning into the Taking Good Care show. I'm Dr. Andrew Wong, based in Toronto, Canada.
And I'm Dr. David St. Arno, based in Edmonton, Canada. We're two practicing psychologists with over a decade of experience each, working in a variety of settings and supporting diverse populations.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. While we're both practicing psychologists, our podcast is intended purely for educational and entertainment purposes. It's not a substitute for professional mental health care or treatment. If you're in need of support, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area.
All right. Hey, Andrew.
Hi, Dave. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. Yeah. Today has been a good day. So, how are you doing?
Pretty good as well. Nothing much is happening today. Glad to be here for our conversation, to talk about things that we enjoy. That's such a big part of our lives. And today, speaking of our lives, it's talking about self-compassion. Again, another fully loaded couple of words. What does it mean? What is self-compassion? And is it easy? Is it difficult? And hopefully providing some education to our listeners.
For sure. I think I love doing this podcast, and I think about what are the things that I've learned over my training and experience as a psychologist. And maybe some of this is going to be repetitious for some people, or maybe they're going to be bored by this topic because it is quite in the popular self-help world now. But I still think there's so many people out there that you mentioned self-compassion and they're like, what are you talking about? What does that mean?
I think it's different. I think it's unique coming from a couple of clinicians as we talk about it, though, versus, like you said, in the self-help world, where clinicians or researchers are writing books or, recording videos on how people can produce self-compassion or self-help. I think for me, it's, having learned so much from even my clients and over the course of over a decade of working with clients, what I've seen in terms of those who might be having an easier time with self-compassion. Again, we haven't even defined it yet, but we will. And those who have a harder time with self-compassion, right? So for you, Dave, like self-compassion, again, loaded term, but in a nutshell, what would that mean for you as a professional or even on a personal level?
Well, I'll go with the definition that Kristen Neff has put out. She's one of the researchers and authors in this area. Treating oneself with the same kindness, care, and concern that one would offer a close friend. So I think, we could probably discuss this a little bit further. That resonates with me. I think I'm someone who is quite compassionate and empathetic for others. And then being able to turn that towards myself, I go, okay, that makes sense to me. But what are your thoughts on definition of self-compassion?
Even before I get there, I would say what you said there actually reminded me because you said, I think I'm compassionate and empathic towards others. I will validate that and I will confirm that you are probably one of the most empathic and compassionate people I know. And it brings me to an example. I don't think I ever even told you this, Dave, but many years ago, probably like 13, 14 years ago now, you were helping me move from residence on the University of Alberta campus to my condo. And my parents were there as well. And I remember after you helped me move, my mom said, Dave is such a nice guy. I don't think I ever told you that, but that was what she said. And that I remember that from, like I said, 14 years ago. So totally confirm that you're one of the most compassionate and empathic and helpful guys that I know. But back to your question, what does self-compassion mean to me? I think it's being able to, not even just with a close friend. I like that definition, but as I've learned from my clients, those who, let's say, don't have close friends, those who struggle to make friends, I think it's being able to show empathy to themselves, being able to show self-awareness when they are being hard on themselves. And beyond the awareness, it's being able to also be kind to themselves by acknowledging a strength, by acknowledging something that they've done to promote positive mental health or well-being for themselves, that just sort of elevates them in that moment. That to me, I think is self-compassion. I think many individuals will think of self-compassion or showing kindness to themselves as, oh, you know what? I'll go get a massage today. Right? Which is nice, but that can also be fleeting. And I think it goes back to, okay, how do we create a foundation of self-compassion? Right? So that again, it's almost like the foundation of building. It's always there. Sometimes it may be harder to tap into, but the idea and the concept of self-compassion is always there. We can find it. It's not just something that's fleeting.
Yeah, I'm still recovering from your comment about me being compassionate. I got all tingly and it was like, oh, I don't, this is a little uncomfortable for me. So you got me off guard.
That's my job.
When I when I think about compassion or self-compassion, the things that come up for me or the things that resonate with me are this like universal suffering and how do we treat ourselves or treat other people when there is that suffering and striving for understanding and even having phrases like that's understandable, right? Those are quite different than I think a lot of people, the way we were raised or the way, we're kind of coached or even like in the business or education area of life. It could be like work harder, try harder. And so the other part to self-compassion for me or compassion is the opposite. And it's that like self-criticism or shame or fear
Yeah.
kind of like, oh, okay. A lot more people are familiar with self-criticism. Then we can start there and let's like kind of work backwards a little bit. What would it mean if you were kind to yourself? What would it mean if you were, you know, caring and understanding towards yourself?
Do you, in your professional work, do you often point out to people when they're being self-critical?
I think it, like anything, it depends, right? Depends on where we're at in terms of the therapeutic relationship. But I'm
Yeah.
definitely, taking note of it, right? If someone is really hard on themselves, and I'm guessing that's only the tip of the iceberg, right? Like that's only what's coming out. I get really curious and go like, oh, geez, what is going on here? And I can also personally kind of relate to it, right? So I can go, oh yeah, I grew up in a way where it was figure out what was wrong and fix it, or like, work harder, that same kind of push more, that is actually a good thing to be hard on yourself, right? You will be better, you'll succeed more,
Hmm.
you'll have more friends or whatever it is. That was the formula.
Yeah.
I did not grow up in a way that said like, oh, let's be kind to ourselves. Like
No.
this was a new concept for me, even though like to some level, I think we all understand, or many of us can kind of know it without being taught it. But yeah,
I think we can take this into a couple of different directions, right? Like we can talk about the resourcefulness or the utility of self-criticism and how people can use that as a source of motivation, right? That idea of having someone having a chip on their shoulder. Um, the other direction I was also thinking is like these words of should, could, and would, right? And to me, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but when I hear people in my office and within a minute, they might be able to say like 20 shoulds. I should have done this. I should have done that. I shouldn't have done this. To me, like it really raises the red flags for me in terms of, okay, this is how self-critical the individual is of themselves. And it's really just an example, a snapshot. If they can say should, would, or could 20 times in a minute in my office, I wonder how many times it happens in a day.
absolutely. And then, okay, so here's an interesting piece. If you were raised in the way that I'm talking about, automatic reaction when you see someone being self-critical is you might want to be critical of their self-criticism, right? And you might want to like call them out or tell them what they're doing is wrong. That's the opposite of what we're talking about, right? It's like,
Yes.
how do we meet someone with compassion and understanding? And I think so. The first point is to notice it. The next point is to go, how can I model this?
Yeah.
And this person might be able to experience it and then possibly apply it for themselves. And some clients will even tell me, like, I heard your voice or I heard the phrase that you've told me many of times, right? And so you can kind of internalize something that maybe you didn't grow up with or you didn't experience.
You raised such an interesting point about the fine balance between telling someone that they're using this word a lot, because yeah, then now you as a professional may be criticizing. And then what I've also heard clients, if I do point it out to them, and let's say in an appointment or in a session, they'll say, "Oh, I shouldn't have used the word should." It's like, well, mm, good try. I'm glad you were aware of that. Um, but we have to reframe that. Let's think of that a little bit differently, because then as a clinician, you're like, oh, it's backfiring a little bit because now the person is critical of themselves using the word should.
Yes, yes. And I've definitely seen that with like the CBT approach and identifying, cognitive distortions or negative beliefs. And all of a sudden the person could be harder on themselves because they feel like they're failing at like picking out their negative beliefs and not changing them fast enough or quick enough. So I really like Paul Gilbert, compassion focused therapy. They
Yeah.
call it like the third wave of CBT. So it still encompasses all of the CBT kind of philosophy, but from a different perspective, right? Like it's this um, shoot, I'm drawing a blank. No, I'm gonna have to restart. Okay. Practicing some self-compassion right now as we're
It's all
as we're
good.
talking. You know, I don't want to get into too many details about this therapeutic approach, but just understanding that there is a therapeutic approach that is shown to be helpful, really, especially with depression, and you can understand why. Paul Gilbert talks about like basically depression being self-bullying. So yes, you're gonna experience negative things. Yes, you're gonna feel bad. You're gonna feel low about stuff, but it's the beating yourself up about it that really can perpetuate that spiral, that downward spiral into a really dark place. So the approach, the self-compassion focused or the compassion focused approach allows us to access more of the self-soothing system within us to go like Kristen Neff has a couple phrases that are a nice reminder. It's like, may I accept myself as I am, right? Let's start there. May I be kind to myself unconditionally. May
Yeah.
I have courage. May I remember that we are all human. May I know that others struggle along with me. May I give myself the compassion I need. May I care for myself. May I cherish myself. And may I have peace of mind. So, again, if you're in the midst of kind of beating yourself up and then you go, oh, hold on, hold on. How do I be kind to myself? If I was my best friend right now, and I was going to support my best friend who was saying the things that I'm saying to myself right now, what would that sound like?
Yeah. The one that resonates with me is actually the last one. May I have peace of mind. For me, it might just be the word peace, but even if if the exercise is okay, just be aware of the times that you use the word should, could, or would, right? Just be aware, because then people will say, well, what do I do with that? It's like nothing. Right? You don't have to do anything with it. The whole exercise is just to be aware of it. And even sometimes just being more aware of it can start to curb perhaps the usage of those words. And so, like, being at peace with it, right? Knowing that it's okay, you don't have to do anything with it. Because oftentimes I find that with the self-critical individual, there's this need to sometimes see progress as quickly as possible, right? So if I'm coming to therapy and I'm not seeing progress in my own definition, right? Like 2 sessions, 1 session, 3 sessions, I should be able to get over all of this, all of the challenges that I'm having. It's being able to be at peace that, you know what, it's a process, that this is going to be okay. But again, it takes practice to have that self-compassion, to not beat yourself up if things are not going as expected.
For sure. And, one of the parts of this that like a takeaway is that it might seem kind of counterintuitive, but the more self-compassionate you can be towards yourself, the more resilient you actually are when the bad things happen. And so how does that work? How would we be more resilient if we're being kind to ourselves? But just like what you said, like what do you say to yourself when you make a mistake? Right? What is the self-talk that shows up when you feel like you've screwed something up or you made a mistake? And kind of when I was listening to you, I'm thinking like, yeah, that like I'm a failure or I'm bad. Essentially that like the shame response, right? Something
Yeah,
is wrong with me. And how resilient are we going to be when that's the conclusion that we come to, right? I made
yeah.
this mistake, and that means I'm a horrible human being or I'm bad, then there's nowhere to go from there, right? It's just a bad space. But if you're compassionate and you can kind of go, "Oh, yeah, of course, you made a mistake." Yeah. And you're worthy of love and care and attention. And so what do you want to do? What do you want to do with this? How can we learn from this experience and then move forward?
I think for many people, it's so easy to spiral, right? Once you get into that negative headspace, I'm bad, I'm not good at this, I suck. We're easily hardwired to go into that negative loop. And so once one thing goes wrong, then let's say another thing in your mind goes wrong, and then you just keep beating yourself up until there's like nowhere to go, right? And even as other people may be trying to help you out of that spiral, all the should and the but statements come out, yeah, you did really well on that though, don't forget that. Yeah, but, you know, I
Mhm.
couldn't do this, and this is the only thing that's on my mind right now. Right. So that sort of self-shaming, this self-critic becomes so prominent that they can't get themselves out.
Well, and we talked a bit about this in another episode, but this predisposition, right? Like we're all born in the world with a certain kind of temperament and predispositions, and some people are going to be more lean more on that. And I know even just with my own kids, like the conclusions they might come to and think that they're bad, or like even the comment of, you probably wish you didn't have me, or things like that, that just break my
Mm,
heart, right? But of course, that's some kids, some people will kind of gravitate towards that. So it's not necessarily that you've had been treated that way, but
mhm.
there's also the aspect of like a lot of people have been, kind of raised in a shame-based approach where you were made to feel bad about what you did, so you would
Yep.
learn from it and not do it again. But unfortunately, the kind of byproduct of that is you actually start being really hard on yourself and almost kind of like beating other people to it. You're going to be harder on yourself. You're going to be more critical of yourself so that you can avoid other people later criticizing you or um, being critical.
Yep. There's a certain population that I find the idea and the concept of self-compassion to be quite challenging, at least for them to understand it and comprehend it. It's like you said, with sort of the personality predisposition, those who are very achievement oriented, right? And, from an early age, they may have been high achievers. They were perhaps sort of trained or groomed to be that way as well, to always be looking for what's next. And having that self control that, okay, I need to complete A, B, C, and then I will achieve that. Okay, what's next? Let's do another A, B, C, done, next. And so as they go through, at least in our culture, you go through school, you do well. You go off to college or university, you do well there, you get a job, all of this stuff, like it's within your grasp, it's all within your control. You have a blueprint of what you are striving for. And many of these individuals may use sort of that chip on the shoulder, right? Like, I'm out to prove people. I'm out to prove people wrong. I'm out to prove this to myself. So and so said I couldn't do it, but watch me. And so they sort of navigate through all of these milestones, and they're great achievements, but this is the way that they've navigated it. And oftentimes when they show up at my office, it's because all of a sudden chaos has been introduced, whether it's maybe a death in the family, perhaps a failing relationship, perhaps for whatever reason losing a job, something that was no longer in their control, right? They can no longer grasp that control, and the more they try, the harder it is. And that's where, like, almost not having those years of self-compassion, right? Or very, very little of it comes back to be so difficult for them.
For sure. You're saying that, and I'm thinking I have several examples, where people will basically say, if I'm not self-critical or if I'm not so hard on myself, whatever the language is, right? I'm just going to be lazy or I'm not going to do anything. And so this idea that it's a need that you have to talk to yourself a certain way, you have to treat yourself a certain way. Otherwise, it's not going to be good, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
where this research is really helpful because it's like, actually, that doesn't happen, right? People don't get lazy or just stop having any motivation to do anything because they're kinder to themselves. That doesn't happen. But if that has been kind of your life strategy, it's scary to go, maybe I won't, what would I be like if I stopped punishing myself or stopped yelling at myself to even to do good things, like even to go, do self-care, right? You can actually, there's a new book, Toxic Productivity, and part of it in there is like, how we can actually use self-care in a kind of a negative way. It looks nice
That's
from the
interesting.
outside, yeah, but being really hard on ourselves about doing it right and doing it enough. And
I think you bring up a really good point, though. It's like, again, going back to individuals who constantly strive, right? Like if you introduce the concept of self-care, am I doing it right? Am I doing it enough?
Mhm.
Right? Again, all these questions that sort of promote self-doubt as well, right? And so then you can tell yourself, well, I'm only doing it twice a week. That's not enough.
Mhm.
I need more,
Mhm.
right? And then if you don't reach that milestone or that self-prescribed milestone, now you're going to beat yourself up for that.
Well, the people listening to the podcast might, resonate with that, right? Like a lot of people listening to these kinds of either self-help or mental health kind of things, it's I need to learn more, I need to do more, I need to be better at this. And it's like, hold on. Part of the self-compassion is like accepting yourself as you are right now. Like that is good enough. And, what do you want to do with your time and your energy and your life and what's meaningful to you? And there's a bit of a paradox when we accept someone as they are, they're more
Yep.
willing to change and open to change, right? So
Yep.
let's start there.
I think even personally for me, the whole idea of self-compassion, I remember we were having this is such an interesting episode because it's bringing me back to like 14 years ago or whatever, back in Alberta. Like if you remember, during our first year PhD courses, we would have these practice sessions, right? And we would be observed by either a professor or our peers. And I remember one particular practice. It might have been with you. I don't even remember if you remember, but like all the stuff that we talked about in terms of even me personally, like reaching certain goals, reaching milestones, striving for more. Like for the longest time, that was me, like not being able to put on the brakes. Like if I reach a milestone, okay, what's next? Let's keep pushing. Um, and I see you smiling right now, so maybe you do remember. But that was definitely me for a long time, just constantly pushing for more. And I think I had at the time, like I had the energy to do it. I think I am somebody who has lots of ideas and want to dive in and just do certain things. But I think it wasn't until maybe several years ago when I sort of consciously just thought, okay, when is it time to stop? You know, am I getting a little exhausted here? Just in terms of constantly thinking, okay, what's next? What can I do with my practice? What can I do with the school board projects? Let's go, let's go. And so it wasn't until like, okay, let's think about slowing down. Why am I doing all of this? Right? Do I need to have a practice that has, 20 people in it or like 3 locations, 5 locations. No, right? Can I be happy with this and satisfied? Not even happy, just be at peace with this.
For sure. And I think you bring up a good point about it being kind of subconscious, right? Like you can be just doing it and pushing yourself and living a certain way. And then at some point, maybe, maybe even listening to this podcast, you start reflecting and going like, you almost need to check in with yourself, right? And if you're not used to doing that, if you're used to being focused on your next achievement or your next goal or the people around you, that can be kind of a foreign concept. And I was laughing or smiling because I was really resonating. I remember my first year in the PhD program and I was TAing 2 courses and I was like, there was a lot going on that I was really hitting some limits in terms of what I could actually do for myself. And it wasn't until I joined this training group, but it actually was like a lot of doing our own work and not, we're not role playing or anything. It was showing up as a human being. And part of the beginning of that training, it would be 3 days, once a month. Um, and it was checking in, like actually taking a minute and sharing with the group, like, how am I doing right now? What's going on for me? And I remember I would literally go back to the office after and I would cross time slots out because I was like, I need a little more time for myself. Like, I'm actually
Yeah.
burning out or exhausted, but I don't feel it when I'm like in it.
Yeah.
But if I slow down, close my eyes, actually reflect and pay attention to myself, oh geez, what do I do with that information?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that speaks more to people going for their PhDs in terms of the that sort of personality, and I completely understand when you say, you know what, started to cross out time slots because I started to do that the latter half of last year in terms of saying, okay, I'm going to see one person less a day, right? Just to take that time to grab a bite to eat, go out for a walk, like something that can say, okay, you know what, I'm making a change here. And I wonder if that's what a big part of self-compassion is. It's making a change, doing something different that may benefit yourself.
Yeah, I think again, maybe I'll be a little more self-disclosing today than usual, but part of my own therapy. Like I can still remember the session and I'm talking about how many boards I'm on and the extra work that I'm doing here and the thing that I'm doing here and I'm going on and my feeling is that I'm not doing enough, right? Like I'm not spending enough time with my family, I'm not working enough, I'm not contributing enough to society. Like there's all these and my therapist was like basically reflecting how much she thought I was doing, like how overwhelming everything that I was talking about was. And so then to try to like rectify that and go, how could I feel like I'm not doing enough? And like someone else could be like overwhelmed with what I was doing and just going like, I need to reflect, I need to reassess what is going on right now.
So, is there compassion fatigue? Compassion fatigue, I know oftentimes we think about it as towards other people, but can we even have compassion fatigue towards ourselves? Well, maybe not compassion fatigue, but not even having that self-compassion to be able to give to ourselves. Like we're giving so much to other people. Like to your point, like you were on all these boards, you were taking care of other people, even in our line of work, we are caring for other people as well. So you're giving yourself to others so much so that you've neglected yourself.
I think that's a great word. And that self-neglect isn't really written that much about in compassion, but I think if you are self-compassionate, then you will not have compassion fatigue, right? You will be attending to your needs and yourself in a way that I think we're going to have another podcast later on about boundaries, right?
Yep.
That allows you to cross out time blocks in your schedule, that allows you to do the things like go to sleep an hour earlier because you're tired and you're just not going to do another hour of work on something. So, not neglecting your own needs.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate here for a moment. What if a person who's in your office says, well, that sounds pretty selfish.
Oh, you know what? I love that because working with the men that I work with, the men's group, and like, oh my gosh, self-care, anything that was focused on yourself was labeled as selfish. That, the little bit of kindness or a little bit of attention towards yourself. And I see this all the time. Like these people, most of these people do not come to therapy on their own. Like, because therapy is focused on yourself, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes they'll show up because they want to fix a relationship or do something different in other areas or because someone else told them that they have to talk to someone. But even just like that discomfort with like focusing on yourself, like let's take a minute, turn inwards, notice what you're feeling in your body, right? And then they'll like ask me questions and be like, "Well, how are you doing? And what are your kids up to?" Right? And they're like, because it feels selfish, it feels wrong, it feels bad. So unpacking that a little bit and going like, "Well, what's the difference between self-care and selfishness?" Right?
That's interesting. Yeah.
And I sometimes joke with clients that like you are so far from being selfish, like you could move, you know, 50% in that direction and still be far away from being, people are so afraid of being called like a narcissist or selfish. And it's got such a negative connotation in our society that I think it actually promotes that like neglect of your own needs.
I think it goes to that classic example of like, the airplane masks, right? The oxygen masks. If you don't put it on yourself first, like let's say you help somebody else. Yeah, maybe you save their life, that person's life, but then you no longer, are alive. And if you had helped yourself first, perhaps then you could put on five other masks for the people around you versus just one other. Right. So being
Hmm.
able to care for yourself, like it's energizing. It's trying to find that energy for yourself so that you do have energy to give to others who need it.
For sure. I think about that one, but I also think about like running into the burning building and how we glorify it and socially, it's like amazing that you would sacrifice yourself to help someone else. But, on a practical level, if that's happening every day, right? You're just putting yourself aside for other people or for your work or for whatever, you name it. Um, there's a cost to that,
Yeah.
right?
For you, Dave, I know you consistently run a group. Is there power to group therapy to enhance self-compassion? And by that I mean for others to comment on how they see somebody else who may be struggling with being kind to themselves in a safe environment, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, actually, that wasn't where I was going with this when you started talking about it, because I was thinking more of like the times where where people are able to witness someone else be vulnerable and actually share their suffering in the group. And then other people resonate with that. And there's this like sense that like I'm not alone with this. And again, there's like an interesting change in people that I've seen. It's like when they start to realize like I actually matter. I matter just as much as the other people in
Yeah.
my life. And if that's true, I need to take care of myself. I need to be kind to myself. But if you feel like everyone else matters more than you, and I think, in a support group, that's where you organically get to kind of see this unfold and challenge some of those societal beliefs about what it means to be a good parent, what it means to be a
Yeah.
man or a woman, or what it means, yeah, a good person.
And I think that's really a building block for resilience. Being able to be self-compassionate and having the awareness too that I can be self-compassionate or, oh, this is what self-compassion is. I really do think it's one of the key ingredients to resilience. Resilience being defined as, being able to overcome adversity when you are faced with obstacles and not just overcoming it by yourself but finding the resources to be able to ask questions, ask for help. Going back to what we were talking about earlier with those who are those high achievers that, grasp for control, many of them will have this self-belief that I can do this on my own. But at the same time, if I don't, man, that self-critic comes out very, very harshly.
Hmm.
And so this idea of being self-compassionate, again, it's not giving up on yourself. It's accepting perhaps what is going on, accepting that there are obstacles or adversities that you're facing. But I think you mentioned this close to the beginning of today's podcast. Okay, so now what? Right? So yeah, I am faced with adversity. I can beat myself up, or I can now show a glimpse of resilience and problem solve, right? And what does problem solving look like?
Yeah, and again, if we go back to, the more self-compassion you can have, the more resilient you'll be. That that can be just a hard thing to wrap your head around if right. And
Yeah.
even that, like you're saying, I need to do this on my own. I always get curious and I think about like, well, where did you learn that? No baby is born in this world and is like, I'm gonna do this thing on my own. It's like, no, we actually need to depend on other people, but at some point, that was the message. That was either taught explicitly or it was modeled or, we picked it up that to be a good person, to be strong, to be, you name it, on your own. Don't ask for help. Don't show any weakness. Don't show any
Yeah.
vulnerability.
How many times do you even hear, maybe it's in sports or at school, get up and try harder? This is an example I use all the time in my presentations. It's, when working with parents or teachers, that line, get up, try harder. What if the child is there going, well, I tried my hardest. What does harder even look like? I would rather, as adults, we ask the children who we work with or our own kids, okay, so we've fallen. How can we do it differently this time? Instead of saying just try harder.
Yeah, when you were talking about that, it actually brings up a experience that I just had this week with my little one at home. So he tried out for a couple of club soccer
Nice.
teams, and he's been playing. Yeah, he's been playing like um, community, and it was like, okay, now I think this is the time where if you really want to play more soccer, you go to a club team and you play there because they practice more, and you're doing more soccer with a lot of kids that are really interested in soccer. So it's the next step, right? But we went to these tryouts, and there were so many kids there, and we went to the first one and he didn't make the A team or the B team, but we're like, we got another tryout, so we'll go to that one. And this one was 3 days instead of 2 days. And again, there was like 40 kids and they're trying to make two teams. And so he tried out, he tried his best. Like I was so proud of him. It was awesome to watch him, like even just the development in those 3 days, like he was just getting it. And so as a parent, like I was totally anxious and wanting him to like make the team and want the best for him. But he tried his best. He had fun. And then we had to wait like 4 days to find out if he made the second team. And then I got that email and it was like, thanks for coming out. We appreciate your interest and that your child wasn't selected, right? So then I was like, oh man, I got to tell him. So that night, because I don't want him to hear it from other kids at school and things like that. So that night it was like our bedtime routine. And I told him, I'm like, I got some bad news. Like you didn't make the team. And and he just started crying.
Oh,
Like it was just like, oh, he just buried his head in my like chest and was just sobbing. And I'm like, oh, this is what I didn't want to have happen, right? Like this breaks my heart. Maybe I could have avoided this some way or tried to like I'm trying to like model this self-compassion and do things like this that are kind of new to me in some ways, right? But you know what the coolest thing was is he cried and I had tears and we just like we were sad together. And then he looked at me and he's like, "Can we read the book?" And I was like, you want to read the Dogman book?" And he's like, "Yeah, can we read the book?" I'm like, "Okay." And so like in a compassionate way, meeting him and just like understanding that it hurts when you don't make something or don't get what you've been trying hard for. And then that like actually you move on. And like I asked my wife the other day, I'm like, has he mentioned it? Has it come up? And she's like, no, like it just, so I feel like that's a good example for myself to go like, just have some compassion, and then we can continue doing other things. We don't get stuck in it. We don't get like it doesn't, we don't have a broken heart forever.
Well, what I love about that example is that he asked you to read a book. So it wasn't like he just sort of, okay, I got the news, I'm upset, I'm gonna shut you out, and I'm just gonna go curl up in a ball and, I don't want you around. Right? I think this is the perfect example of my definition of resilience is that you're able to ask for help with the people around you and showing that compassion and being able to say, okay, I know what's gonna soothe me in this event, and I want dad there, and I want dad to and I to read together. So it's showing two different things. It's okay, I know what's going to help me, and I want you to help me as well, which I think is incredible. I think for a lot of kids, I was thinking that this is where this example was going, like just a quick turnaround or relatively quick turnaround. I think kids can show us so many things, not dwelling on something, being able to show some self-care. Even with my own kids, it's like, okay, they know right now that they just need some downtime. We probably program them quite a bit in terms of different activities, which, is sort of the norm in today's age, unfortunately. That's for another podcast. But, there are times when both of them will say, you know what, I just want to go to my room and read, or I just want to go build something. And it's like, okay, they're trying to tell us something. They need their time, and this is the way that they're going to show their own self-compassion. Just leave me alone for a little while, please.
Well, and just this idea that challenging our own beliefs and our own understandings of things, like that actually when we're quote unquote weak, right, we can actually be stronger. We can actually bounce back quicker, letting ourselves feel those painful emotions and we can do that together. And hopefully, when this happens for my son, where who knows, whatever he's going to try to do and it doesn't work out, that he can do that for himself too. Like I think that's the self-compassion piece. It's a lot easier if we've experienced it from someone else to us. So again, with therapy, I think that's part of what we do. We're treating people a certain way, we're meeting them in a certain way, and hopefully they can internalize that. Not that they, again, not to, you have to do it all on your own and you have to just like have compassion for yourself, but that you can do that.
So, Dave, I guess from a professional perspective, if someone was in your office and you can tell that, self-compassion is a very challenging concept for them, how would you help them develop and instill the idea that, okay, we need to be more self-compassionate and this is how we're going to do it? Are there steps in which you would take with somebody who's sitting right in front of you?
Well, first of all, like if that's my assessment, right? Like if that's coming from me and I think it would be good for you if you were more self-compassionate. So I kind of I check myself a little bit in terms of why I might have that belief or that hypothesis. But a lot of times I'm just pointing out what I'm noticing, right? So it's like, oh man, it sounds like you're really hard on yourself. And they're like, yeah. And it's like, well, let's start there. Like, what is that like for you? What does that feel like? When does that happen? Right? And then, how has that served you well? How did you learn that? And how has that served you? And then like what are the costs to
Yep.
it? Right. And so if they're open to then going like, maybe I don't want to do this so much anymore, but I don't know what else to do. Well, I got some ideas, right? Like self-compassion. And then they're like, well, what is that? Like, what does that even mean? Right. And so then we can talk about what it means. And then again, I want to have like informed consent. I want to have agreement that someone actually wants to change something before I'm even suggesting some options.
Yeah, and I think for me too, like on top of what you just said there, even finding ways that in their sort of daily living that exemplifies, okay, is there a certain part of the day? Is there a certain activity that, again, we can promote just some conscious awareness that, oh, I am being self-compassionate to myself, with myself here. For some of us, we're so hardwired for the negative that even when in passing we have done something nice for ourselves or, raised a bit of awareness in terms of that, like it's so fleeting. It just flies above us and we don't even acknowledge it. So it's like helping somebody be more aware, like that was a great example of self-compassion. Now, did we acknowledge it?
For sure. And the other thing to pay attention to, and I think sometimes I like metaphors, and for me it's like it's building a bridge. If I notice that someone has a lot of compassion and understanding for other people, but is quite self-critical and hard on themselves, maybe I'll even point out an example of noticing them, if I'm limping because I had a soccer game or I'm sore from something I did, and they're like, "Oh, are you okay?" And then they're like asking me questions and try, like they're being compassionate
Yes.
with me in that moment. And I'm like, oh, so then they already know how to
Yep.
do that, right? They're already attending to someone else's suffering or someone else's discomfort. So then let's talk about how to build a bridge so that you can start talking to yourself in that same way. Start responding to yourself when you make a mistake or when you're hurting in that same way.
I love those eureka light bulb moments when, to your example, like when they ask me how I'm doing. And then again, depending on how strong of a therapeutic rapport I have with them, I might flip the question back and say, hey, you just asked about me. Have you asked yourself how you've been doing this week?
Hmm.
Right. And sometimes like you'll see sort of the eyes sort of open a little bigger. And it's like, oh, I haven't actually. But like you said, like you have provided the perfect example. Like if you can ask me, then you can probably ask yourself too.
Yeah, you have all of the ability, right? You have all of the kind of, because this is not, not everyone can do this. Not everyone has the ability to even like how empathetic people can be with others or being able to take perspective from another person. Like that is a foreign concept and one that is quite challenging for some folks,
Yeah.
right? So, but I'm looking, can you do it for other people? Well, then it's going to be easier to do it for yourself. If you can't do it for other people, well, you might still be able to learn it. It's going to be harder though,
Yeah.
right?
You bring up a really good point. Like everybody's going to have their own ability to do this, and so depending on who I'm working with, I always assess, if this person really struggles with self-compassion and being kind to themselves, if I can get just even 10% more out of them, perhaps that's our goal, right? It's
Yeah.
all relative.
Well, when I think about self-compassion or even like that Paul Gilbert stuff about bullying yourself, like crap happens, like bad things happen to good people and like bad things happen all the time. And sometimes, people are coming to us and telling us about all the bad things that are happening. And a lot of those things are out of their control. But the one thing that is in their control is how do they react or respond to themselves, right?
Yeah.
And so it's already bad enough that you just got diagnosed with cancer or you just found out like whatever the bad news is. But it's even worse when you start calling yourself, terrible names.
Yeah. And so yeah, for me it's like bringing that awareness, be aware and be attuned to when you are calling yourself a bad name,
Mhm.
when you are kicking yourself down even further. And again, do we need to do anything with it right away? No, but just be aware that perhaps some of these words that you're using towards yourself may be more hurtful than you think.
And the language, right? Like you said, a lot of the shoulds. One of the CBT stuff is like change the should to like it would be nice, right?
Yep.
So it's like I should go to the gym. Well, it would be nice if I went to the gym, right? That there's a different feeling to that.
A different tone. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. So, what is the takeaway message for you today, Dave?
Oh, you always ask me first. I kind of want to start with you. What's your takeaway?
I think for me, the biggest one of the biggest factors I think for self-compassion really is that self-awareness. And I think one of the things that you said, Dave, that really resonated with me was about being if you can be kind to others, can we somehow take a mirror and reflect it back on ourselves? And actually, one of the exercises that I do in my sessions, especially for those who really struggle with a self-critic, I will have them draw a picture of what the self-critic looks like. And I really like the exercise because, again, sort of that light bulb moment with the client, it's like, oh my gosh, like I just drew a picture of myself, right? Or
Mhm.
I just drew a picture of somebody I know. And then that's the person who, over so many years, have been so self-critical of me. And this is where it's stemming from. So, I like the idea of being able to reflect it back on yourself. If you can be kind to others, can you do it for yourself? And what would that look like?
So you were talking about that, and I know you mentioned this a bit before in terms of like empty chair, two chair work. Like sometimes doing that, like having, not like you're saying, draw the clinic or the critic, but actually have the critic speak to the other person. Like, and I know this sounds far out for some of the listeners, but just giving the critic a voice in your so here's the chair for the critic, here's the chair for you, and there's a bit of a conversation, and as a witness, as a therapist, you get to get a better idea of like how does this person speak to themselves, right? What are the things that are said? And what's interesting about that is that there can be natural like compassion that comes from that experience, right? And like you said, sometimes it's like, well, whose voice is that, right? Does that sound like someone's voice? Yeah, it does. It sounds like my mom or sounds like my dad or sounds like a teacher I had, right? So that was, as you were talking, which is just jumping out to me. But the other thing, like you said, drawing the critic, drawing or like part of the Paul Gilbert stuff, one of the activities is imagining this like compassionate figure,
Yes.
and you get to create that. And the real cool stuff about some of the research now is that our imagination is so powerful in terms of creating these like corrective experiences. And so even if you don't have someone in your life that is compassionate, that because everyone wants, someone else to start that, right?
Yeah.
But we know with attachment and we know with self-compassion that you can create that, whether it's a real person or an imagined person, and start to feel what it would be like, or have like a social support in your mind. And that translates into like felt sense and behavior and even the way you've, yeah. So sorry, we just stumbled on this at the end of the session, and I'm getting really excited about it because it's really neat for people that are going like, well, I don't have anyone in my life that, you know, is compassionate or kind to me.
That's usually my next step. Like once they do draw a picture of like that critic, might not
Hmm.
be right after, but a session or two after, it's like, okay, well, we worked through some of that. Now what does the compassionate voice look like? To your
Hmm.
point, like let's draw that compassionate thing or face or whatever figure. And what is it about this figure that makes it so compassionate? What does it sound like? What does it do? Is it a high-pitched voice? Is it a low-pitched voice? Like, what is it? And it's such
Hmm.
a neat exercise. And like you said, I think we just stumbled upon something.
Yeah.
But it's, again, it's just another exercise that can help to bring a sense of perhaps control, but in a self-compassionate and productive way.
In a way that we can do something about this, right? Like it's something that we can try and work on. And for me to wrap it up, like it's more about this idea of self-compassion has really highlighted to me this idea of like humanity, common suffering, universal suffering. Like it allows me to feel more connected to the world, in a way that feels good, that feels healthy, that like if we and yeah, the world will be a better place if we can come together and share our suffering and have compassion for others and for ourselves. I really think society, the world is just would be better served.
And just to piggyback on that, I think it's what you said there resonates with me in terms of, okay, yes, we're all going to suffer and there's going to be universal suffering, yet everything will be okay.
Yeah.
And on that note, everyone take good care and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Take good care.